I think I'm saying that we struggle all our lives to answer it. That it's the struggle that is important. That's what helps us to define our place in the universe.
This is Beverly, Dr. Beverly, Dr. Beverly Crusher.
Look where we are, here, all of us, in this moment. So let's do what we spent our entire lives learning to be great at.
And this is Crusher Convo. Hello, and welcome to Crusher Convo, or Crusher the Conversation, one episode at a time. And I am so excited because I have one of my favorite TNG writers with me today. Please welcome Melinda Snodgrass. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Jessie. I appreciate it.
I'm so excited. I really want to thank you personally because I feel like you wrote one of the best Beverly Crusher episodes out there. I haven't only been a fan for the last 3 years. And when I saw that episode, I was like, this is great. And so, yeah, been a fan of all your episodes, actually. But before we get into the Star Trek talk, I kind of wanted to know how it all began. I know you were an attorney before. So how did the writing get into the mix of it all?
Well, you know, writing is a career where everybody pays it forward. And I was a really unhappy lawyer. I really hated being a lawyer. I love the study of law, but I hated the practice. And my best friend at the time was a novelist, science fiction novelist, and I grew up loving science fiction. And he said to me, I bet you could write if you tried. And so I did, and I started writing novels. And then as life and fate would have it, a gentleman moved down to New Mexico, little known guy. We have big hopes for him, a guy named George R.R. Martin. And George and I became very, very good friends. He was in our role-playing group. George and I created a shared world anthology called Wild Cards that we've been doing for more years than I want to admit to. And you know, as George eventually got drawn out to Hollywood to work on the new Twilight Zone and then on Beauty and the Beast. And George called me and one day and he said, hey, Snod, I think you'd be really good at this screenwriting thing. And if you write a spec script, I'll give it to my agent. So I didn't want to write for Beauty and the Beast because I didn't want to put George on the spot. You know, if I sucked at this and I wrote a bad script, I thought it would be bad.
Whoops.
So, and I looked at LA Law, but it looked like it was really carefully plotted and I didn't know how to, you know, slide in an episode. And I had grown up as a kid loving Trek, you know, the original series. And I saw that Trek had come back. So I started watching Next Generation, the first season. And I thought, well, and I fell in love with Data. I thought he was the most interesting character on the show.
Right.
And so I wrote a spec Star Trek script that was The Measure of a Man. And they bought it and then they hired me. And that's how I ended up. But I'm going to roll back and tell one other piece of that story. So when George called me and told me about writing spec scripts, he said, a spec script is just a calling card. All it does is it gets you in the door to potentially pitch other episodes. Nobody ever sells their spec script. So I thought, okay. And then I came up with this idea that became Measure of a Man. And I called George and I said, look, George, I have this idea and I think it's really good. And if it's not going to sell, I don't want to waste it, you know, and the spec. So maybe I ought to write some of these other ideas that I've come up with for Trek. And George gave me the single best piece of advice I have ever gotten as a writer. He said, Melinda, never hoard your silver bullet. Meaning lead with the best thing you've got, the thing you're most passionate about, the thing you most believe in. And so I wrote Measure of a Man and it launched my Hollywood career and it was nominated for a Writers Guild Award and Outstanding Writing on a Drama, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, thank you, George, for the encouragement and the advice. And that's how I broke into Hollywood. And then I went on and, you know, worked on a lot of other shows and pilots and movies and stuff. So, that's where it all began. So.
No, that's awesome. I mean, like I said, I just started watching TNG Trek in general, actually 3 years ago. And as I was going into season 2, Measure of a Man, I was all like, oh my gosh. And I'll get more into detail when we start talking about it. But it was one of those episodes that really get you thinking. Like, it's not just like, it's just a filler episode. It's just one of these. No, it had depth. Everyone had a role in it. Like, it was beautifully put together. And to actually look at your work. So I got the little, got your little list here. You're a Man, Up the Long Ladder, Menage a Troy, you were a script consultant. And did Teleplay for Pen Pals, which was another favorite episode of mine. And then Story Editor for Shades of Grey, The High Ground, as we will talk later. And then Ensigns of Command. So
well, actually, the weird thing is, as story editor and on staff on the show, I worked on everything. I mean, basically, unless it was
true.
Being written by, we the Data's Daughter, that I could never remember the actual title of.
The Offspring.
The Offspring. I rewrote that episode because it was a spec, and it needed some work. So you get pulled in.
Got it.
Menage a Toy. Oh God, it actually went through. we also had one that we jokingly called Hot Fudge Troy. I can't even remember which episode we dubbed that one, but some of the staff and all of us did. Sometimes the only way you can stay sane on a TV series is to laugh.
Right. Right. Especially with some of the things going on, especially because you guys did so many in just a short amount of time.
Yeah.
And here were other writing credits that I saw. So like Beyond Reality, LA Law, Sequest 2023, Sliders, The Outer Limits, Odyssey 5. I'm just going to guess here. You, like you said, science fiction. You're into, you have a, you have an area of expertise here.
Yes. A lot of novels too, science fiction and novels. So I love it. I always have.
So, let me, before we jump into Trek, let's talk about the other of, Galaxy Far, Far Away. As Star Wars Day had just happened, you had posted you and your lightsaber. So since you are a science fiction fan and then you're writing it, besides Trek being an inspiration, Star Wars an inspiration, was there any other science fiction that was also an inspiration for you?
I just think all the books. When I was a kid, we went to this little tiny library near where we lived, and my dad made them allow me to go into the adult section to find books in addition to the kids section. I loved him for that. And, he read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea to me when I was a little kid, and he taught me to read before I went to school. He was a voracious reader. And so he got me permission to go in, and there was this tiny section, very tall and very narrow, that had all the science fiction books. And I started at A, and I literally just read everything all the way down to Z, every book that was there. And so I don't know if there's, I suppose in some ways Edgar Rice Burroughs' A Princess of Mars, because it was the very first book I read all by myself. I was 7 years old. Who else? Probably Tolkien. The trilogy, The Lord of the Rings, is something that I periodically just go back and reread because I need to spend some time in Middle Earth. That's one of those that I do find comfort in. So yeah. Oh,
absolutely. My husband is a huge science fiction nerd. Okay. His favorite is like Alien, and Alien all over the place. Like he has like a Jonesy t-shirt. Like he's a huge fan. And I grew up with Star Wars, but yeah, there's something about the way Tolkien had created Lord of the Rings. Like, it's not really science fiction, obviously, it's fantasy, but that whole, it's just it's a huge world. Like, he created a whole world, right? And you can just get lost in it. And I love that, because you see a lot of people who love science fiction, and Lord of the Rings is on that list. Like, you could just.
Yeah, what I love about Lord of the Rings, I read the Hobbit and the trilogy. We were visiting friends in LA, my dad's business partners, and And they took me to a bookstore to buy me books, because I was a kid and they wanted to keep me entertained. And I saw those covers and I said, I want those. And they only wanted to buy one, but I talked them into buying me all four. And I read everything over a weekend, and then realized that I hadn't fully absorbed it. So I went back and started all over again. And what I discovered about Tolkien is that when I was young, I always thought the Scouring of the Shire was stupid and boring. And, we've got, King Elisar, Aragorn's become king. Why am I reading this thing? And then in my 40s, I went back and reread the trilogy and I went, oh, the Scouring of the Shire is the entire point of these books. That's the meat of it. That's the heart of it. And the poignancy of it touches me constantly. But I think it's one of those things that as you mature, as you experience more of life, these books will mean more to you. And I just think that's a beautiful thing, because there's a lot of times when entertainment is popcorn, it's like, okay, that was fun, moving on. But Tolkien was talking about some deep universal truths, and it shows. And I think science fiction and fantasy does that really well. I've given a lot of talks about this, but good science fiction is woke as hell, honestly. And it's a place where people can discuss really difficult topics at arm's length. You can talk about racism and sexism and bigotry without people feeling like it's in their face, because it's set in another galaxy or another, elven kingdom or whatever. And so it's a safer place to explore these topics. And maybe people then go, that kind of reminds me about what's happening in the real world. And that's why I love science fiction so much, and why I love writing it so much.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. Now, out of all of your work, was there a show that you had done that you kind of wished you did more of, instead of just like one episode or two episodes that you wish you got to write more of because you enjoyed it so much?
I really, really wish that Odyssey 5 had gotten picked up for a second season, because I was slated to go on the show on staff on that show if they got the pickup. And unfortunately they didn't, because I thought it was a really fun, interesting show. I was sorry about that one. And Reasonable Doubts. I mean, I wish we'd gotten a third, it would have been a third season of that show. It allowed me to write from my legal, training, because it was a cop and lawyer show. So I wish we had been, and I loved writing for Marley Maitland. This is embarrassing. I've just completely blanked on Mark Harmon. Thank you, brain. And
little note actor. It's
so I really loved, and we had a great staff. We had a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed working on that show. So.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to jump right into the TNG portion, because I got a lot to just express my love over. But first, I'm going to talk about Measure of a Man. And of course, like you said, that was your first script, not only TNG, but first script ever. What inspired you to write that story?
Well, as I said, I found Data to be the most interesting character. I mean, part of that was because of Gene. I mean, Gene had this whole thing that my people are perfect, they have no flaws. And it's really hard to write stories, compelling stories about perfect people, because drama is about conflict. And we couldn't really have conflict between the characters. So I found Data fascinating because he's trying to figure out, who he is and how to be and how to live in the world. And I had been a lawyer, and my specialty in law school was constitutional law, which I love. And there's a particular infamous Supreme Court decision called Dred Scott, in which a Black man, a slave, had been brought by his master into a free territory, at which point the man said, I'm in a free territory, now I'm a free man. And the case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and Justice Taney, I believe, Chief Justice Taney, the infamous decision says, no, he's not a man, he's property, and he was sent back to his owner. And I thought, that could work really well for Data, because he is a machine. He was, quote, found. He's an experiment. How is this going to work out in Starfleet and Academy on the ship? And the idea of, using artificial people to go into dangerous situations. I mean, in some ways, Maddox had a reasonable argument. I mean, why risk human or other Vulcan or lives by putting people in danger when we can build these constructs and let them go do that instead. And so that was the genesis of the idea. And then I had a very good friend who was a Navy pilot, and he gave me the thing that I think really elevated the script. Well, there were two things that happened. One, Jerry Weber said to me, when we're a ship at sea and we don't have access to a port in the JAG office, the captain always defends and the first officer always prosecutes. That's how it works on the ship.
Wow.
Oh, wow. That was the piece I needed, because that pitted Picard and Riker against each other in a way that I could get away with without violating, Gene's no conflict between our people thing. Also, Gene was not around when we shot Measure, so he didn't get to mess with it. So that was great. And then the other thing that happened that really, really made the show, be what it is. My boss called me in. We were just about to start shooting. I mean, we were about to go into production meetings and they were about to start shooting the episode. And he called me in and he said, I got some bad news for you. We looked at Whoopi's contract and it says she has to be in, 14 episodes or whatever it was. I don't remember exactly. And if we don't put her in Measure of a Man, we won't meet her contractual obligations. So you need to write a Guinan scene. And by the way, you've got 3 hours.
Oh,
because we have a production meeting. And I was like, oh my God. So I went upstairs in a little tiny office and I walked in circles for about an hour and then sat down and made some notes and started thinking. And then I went downstairs to Maury's office and I said, okay, how about this? And I threw out the Guinan Picard 10 forward scene. And, we talked about it, gave it a few tweaks. He asked questions. We made a few, and I went and he said, okay, that's it. Go write it. And I did. And in many ways, that scene is the heart of the episode.
It is.
Yeah.
I'm shocked right now because I love that scene, because the way, like you said, science fiction is woke as hell.
Yes.
And if you could tell the story at arm's length, it doesn't feel like it's thrown in your face. And it wasn't. It was so brilliantly, just because Picard is like, okay, he's feeling defeated. He's just like, I don't know what to do. They had a good argument. How am I going to do this? And the way she just kind of was all like, well, it's great to build a race of disposable people. And then that's where Picard's like, wait, you're talking about, like, all of a sudden it clicked in his head where she was like, what are you talking about?
Well, and she was supposed to be like, nobody knew how old Guinan was or what,
right.
And so she's wisdom, she's Athena, but without all the Medusa stuff,
Right.
And she was able to take him step by step to the realization. And so, but it was pure happenstance. It was because of a contract thing. I mean, it was, the reality of the business of Hollywood versus creativity, but it ended up becoming, a scene that was really important. So
wow, that is amazing. And it's funny too, because I understand like why you put in the poker scene in the very beginning, because it was showing just how Data is so methodical about how things were, right? Well, human reaction, like he was bluffing and he was like, but that doesn't make sense, right? That was just kind of like the start of the story. But the poker scene ended up being the biggest part of the show. So you're like the creator of that.
That's another funny story. So that was not the teaser I initially had in the spec script. The teaser I had written was Data learning how to swim. And I knew from reading some of the notes from Mike Akuda and Rick Sternbach, Data weighed like 450 pounds, right? I mean, he's a machine. He's
Yeah.
And so I wanted a scene where he's like, I've read all the books, I've studied everything, I've watched videos, here we go, I'm going to swim. And he gets in the pool and he sinks like a stone. And then he just walks across the bottom of the pool and gets out at the other end and was like, what happened? And they're like, doing versus studying. I mean, it was a whole, and when I got hired and had to, do whatever changes that Maury called, he said, we can't do this teaser. He said, for one thing, we suck at going on location and we'd have to go find a swim. And he said, also, Brent's makeup will wash off in the pool. So we can't do that scene, come up with something else. And so I came up with poker because that isn't something you can read all the books, but all those subtleties that humans carry would have been baffling to him. But you didn't have the cards, how could you? I was bluffing, and so that was why it ended up in the script, because Brent's makeup would have washed off. So
I love that. And it's just like I said, because they even put that in Star Trek Picard, is that was their final scene, was the poker scene, and that is you. That's kind of like, in a way, it's like an homage to you, because you created that, whether it was an accident or not.
Yeah, well, it was necessity once again,
Right. Now, I'm curious, because we did see Bruce Maddox in Star Trek Picard, and did you like what they went with his story, or did you wish they did something different?
I was. I have to make a confession, as you probably read from other places and heard. Trek was a very difficult show. And as my friend Rick Manning said, Star Trek puts the S and the T in PTSD. I can't watch Trek. I've never watched any episode after I left the show. I've never watched any of the rest of Next Gen. I never watched I've never watched any of it. The only reason I watched the first season of Picard was because I suddenly had a lot of fans writing me and saying, did you know this show is based on Measure of a Man? And I was like, no, nobody told me. So I went and I watched. I mean, clearly they used Maddox as just a MacGuffin. And, that's fine. Okay. But it felt like everything Picard had said in his closing argument, they completely ignored, because they built a whole race of disposable people who went nuts and killed a bunch of people on Mars. And then I was like, none of you get the point of Measure? I thought the show had a lot of problems, to be honest. And they did what they did. And I'm a little bit disappointed in that, I wasn't expecting to be consulted. I wasn't expecting to be asked to write. But it would have been nice if they'd given me just a card. I didn't even want money. If they just said based on Measure of a Man by Melinda Snodgrass, I would have been thrilled. And in fact, they did that when, they did that with the first Star Trek movie, Wrath of Khan. There's a card that says based on Space Seed by Gene L. Kuhn, because it was based on his episode from the original series. And I would have appreciated if I had just gotten a nod, that my episode gave them an idea that they took, even though they kind of seemed to miss the point. So
a little bit. I think as a fan, and it was disappointing to me for how Bruce ended up. And it was just because after Measure of a Man, Bruce and Data had become friends. And, even in Data's day, he's writing a letter saying, this is what I'm going through and everything. And Bruce is just, taking notes, and, he's doing his research, but in a different way. And then, like you said, it kind of was like they kind of missed the point. And all of a sudden it was like, I don't know if it's because Data died in Nemesis, and so they were like, well, Bruce just went crazy and it was just created. I don't know what that
what that was about. It feels like J.J. Abrams and that team didn't pay any attention to anything that had come before. I mean, and one of the things that really bothered me, because whatever you may say about Trek, the morality of Trek is very clear. And, the cute blonde murders Bruce. And granted, she murdered him because she's out of her mind. But the fact that everybody just kind of goes, "That's okay, sweetie."
Right?
Yeah, that is not Captain Picard. I mean, Picard would have insisted that justice be done. She should have stood trial. And maybe she would have been, acquitted because she was being affected by, whatever it was she saw and blah, blah, blah. But at least acknowledge that it was premeditated murder and not just sort of slough it off. And that really bothered me because it felt like a real violation of things that Trek's tried to stand for, So now I about Picard and the first season of Picard, because I don't know about
that. Well, don't watch 2.
I've heard that there are issues.
Just say, I think 3 did help.
Worrying about why didn't the big metal octopi show up? Because the girl had sent the message, and then they never show up. And I was like, but they were coming.
There's a little disconnect. I know, as a writer, actually, as an attorney and a writer, you were probably like, oh my gosh.
Well, and I couldn't understand. I mean, Patrick is not a young man, and they had a perfect opportunity to download Patrick Picard into some hot young British actor's body, quote unquote, and they could have, had James McAvoy or somebody step into that role, and you could have still kept. I mean, I had all these ideas. I think you could have kept Patrick. That every time James McAvoy, let's use him for example, looks in a mirror, he sees his other self, and it's Patrick, and so you see this, and I mean, it just felt like if you wanted to extend the franchise, there was a way to do it. It was sitting right there. And if I'd been on the staff, I would have suggested it,
Oh, I bet. Trust me, as fans, while we were watching this, we're like, they could have done this instead. I'm about to get into the high ground now, talking about Beverly Crusher.
I wasn't there for the first season. I came on halfway through the second season. And I confess, I mean, I love Diana Muldaur is a brilliant actress, a wonderful.
She really is.
I liked Pulaski, and that was who I was mostly writing for that first season. I liked her because she wasn't just this soft, oh, we all love each other, we're all, she had an edge to her, and I liked that a lot. But ultimately when they brought back Beverly for the third season, I mean, the one thing that always struck me, I was the only woman on the staff. I mean, the upper level staff. And I always felt like all the women were getting short shrift. They didn't know what to do with Deanna Troi. I mean, they wrote her like a man. I mean, and she was always flying off the handle. And I was like, that's not what you wanted your security chief. They didn't know how to write her. Poor Troy, God, it's always, well, she's mom, and she, tells people what they're feeling, and but we never see her. And I had an idea that all the men freaked out about, so I didn't get to write it. And then with Beverly, and I wanted to write something for the women that was not just, being a telephone operator like Uhura, or being a counselor like Troy, or a doctor, the healer. I mean, there are ways to make women strong and interesting without having them just be a guy with boobs,
You're exactly right. I mean, so on this podcast, I do like to highlight the women of Trek. Okay. So that is one of the things that I really want to always express and highlight, and just do what I can. And with this episode, you as a woman was the writer, was the first woman director with Gabrielle Beaumont. And then, of course, Beverly was the main, the character of it. And then even the lead of security for, what was it, the Routians, she was played by Carrie Keene, I believe it was a woman, right? So, and I've heard for so many fans, like even when they watched it for the first time back in the 90s, this was the episode that made them fall in love with Beverly Crusher. So even though like you were like, I'm used to writing for Pulaski, you really highlighted the best of Beverly because she wasn't just a doctor or just a mom, right? There was so much more to her than just those two things. And everything that was kind of going on and you're writing this story, was Beverly the first person that you thought of to write this story? Was she, or did you think of someone else? Yeah.
Remember, it's been 30 odd years, so I don't remember a lot. Also, like I told you, Trek was very difficult, and I was writing that at a time when things were really tough on that show. So in some ways, I don't have a ton, but yeah, I always intended it to be for her. I mean, the guys always got something, and so I wanted her to have a moment, and I never got to do anything with Troy that I wanted to do. And that was disappointing to me, that I didn't get to ever show her using her skills and training more than just, I sense they're upset. And it's like, well, yeah, no kidding,
right,
shooting at us, I mean, hello. Yeah. So
you're representing all the women fans right now.
Yeah, I need to please,
It said, written in response to the producer's request for another action-adventure script, Snodgrass had to come up with the concept of the dimensional shifting to meet Gene Roddenberry's concerns that the terrorists have a logical way to defeat the Enterprise's vast array of technology. How did all that come together, creating like that particular way of doing things? Like I said, keeping the woke stuff at arm's length while keeping it science fiction.
I mean, one of the things I always tried to do was try to keep us somewhat grounded in real science, because I love
right.
Science. And, like we had one person come in, older gentleman, and give us a pitch for the show about how the Enterprise meets aliens who they've never met, and they meet a weapon they can't defeat, and they're completely helpless because the other alien race is using sound waves. And I'm sitting there taking notes in the pitch meeting, and I'm biting my tongue because we didn't want to make the guy feel bad. And then he left. Yeah. And my boss, Michael Pillar, goes, well, I think that's kind of interesting, don't you? And I went, you remember that poster from Alien, in space, no one can hear you scream? At which point I was told, why did I have to be so goddamn difficult? And I got ordered to leave the office and go back to my office because I blew up but it was like, dudes, it's vacuums. There ain't no sound waves in space.
Yeah.
So yeah. But yeah, that was always hard to come up with. How do we defeat the Enterprise without the dilithium crystals breaking every third episode?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, my guess is that I probably went to Rick Sternbach and Mike Akuda and said, help, because they wrote our tech manual, and say, okay, how can we, mess this up? And so I'm going to throw credit their way because I honestly don't remember, but I'm pretty confident I probably did discuss with them because
good 80% confident, right?
Yeah, 80% confident that they were scratching their heads and going, well, maybe this would work, because they were the tech guys,
right.
God help us, they helped us create all that endless, boring technobabble. So,
bless them.
Yeah, I love them for it because.
You actually wrote one of my favorite scenes, which was in the high ground when I had watched it for the first time and the scene popped up. I busted out laughing, and I'm going to just show the clip real quick because I thought it was hilarious.
Regard to Dr. Crusher.
Go ahead.
Doctor, Commander Data has informed me of your situation.
I already know what you're going to say.
Doctor, will you at least
The
allow me
longer we argue, the longer it's going to take me to say.
Doctor, you are endangering yourself and the away team.
Captain, I'm trying to put life back into a wounded body with sleight of hand. They're not going anywhere. Data and Worf don't have to stay. Crusher out.
Transport room, do you have a lock on the away team?
Aye, sir. Shall I transport them?
I don't want to be in the transporter room to greet her.
Riker's response, I died. I was all like, yeah, you're going to piss her off. She's in the middle of saving someone's life.
Like, talk to the hand. Yeah, no.
Right? Oh, and he knew. And Picard's even like, yeah.
I'll be honest, every chance I had to pop Picard's pomposity, I would take. I did it in Measure. I did it here. I always wanted to, do a little bit of a dig because he was always so, I'm the captain.
Yeah, I'm right. I know what I'm talking about. Yeah. I mean, but this also really highlighted even the little bit of tension between Beverly and Picard, especially when they reunited, because he's like, nope, they're terrorists. She's like, I don't know. So you're kind of really thinking outside the box about, what everyone was going through and how they got involved, because they're like, no, we're not involved, but we did send them medical supplies. And they're like, well, maybe kind of involved.
I mean, that's the beauty of Trek and science fiction in general is, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. So none of these issues are easy. They're complicated.
Yeah, which I think right now Andor highlights very well.
Got to say Andor, which is stunning. I mean, just I had to take a break after episode 8 and go fix some dinner before I could go back and watch episode 9 because it was so intense. I mean, it was brilliant storytelling. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think when Rogue One had come out, it was like, this is not trying to dig on the other movies. Those were Star Wars as well, but this was Star Wars that didn't have to always be the Skywalkers or Vader or, the same family line and how it always, the Millennium Falcon. There was more people that were going through all of this with the rebellion and dealing with the Empire and stuff like that. It wasn't just them. So it was so good to kind of see just the other sides of everyone's story, and how they played it out was just brilliant. I can't remember the mom's name from the season 1, but when she had died and the android had shown her hologram with her speech, I was in tears. And, and she's such a brilliant actress that she did just such a wonderful job. But I was like, this is Star Wars, like right here, that moment.
It's Star Wars for grown-ups. And the beauty of Star Wars, I mean, and I'll be, heresy here, guys. I know, because I wrote for Trek. And probably it's because of my experiences to some degree. But I prefer the world of Star Wars to Star Trek. Star Trek's a little too antiseptic for me as it has evolved. I want more Harry Mudds and fewer, I want the rogues of Star Trek, and they never gave.
Yeah.
Everything is so perfect and so clean and so antiseptic. And, Star Wars is grungy and grubby, and, there's people doing the best they can. And I'm sure I can say this without too much spoiler, but in Andor, in episode 9, there's this one small pop of Cyril's mother sitting there with 2 elderly ladies with her. And she's devastated, and I kept thinking, this shows us, they're probably like in a book club together. They play bridge together, or they're at a cooking club together. I mean, that people are just people, even living on Coruscant and being part of the Empire. And that was such a perfect moment. It didn't always have to be Jedi and like with Star Trek, it doesn't always have to be the Enterprise. I mean, it doesn't. There's so much more that I think could be explored, and so I just feel like when you've got a universe that big, mine it, go explore it. So yeah, I'm in love with. I mean, when I went to Rogue One, um, my best friend who got me writing books initially, Victor Milan, who sadly passed away far too young, but Vic and I ended up seeing Star Wars, which was then became A New Hope. But we saw it in the theater on opening night at midnight. They had to add an extra showing because there were so many people in line they couldn't accommodate it. So they added another showing, so we saw it at midnight. And then he and I had a tradition that we went and saw every Star Wars movie on opening day together. So Vic had sadly passed away when Rogue One came out, and so I went on opening day, and just as a kind of little memory homage to him. And at the end of it, I thought, I mean, first of all, I work in the industry, so I was like, wow, this was a Disney movie, that didn't have a happy ending. Well, I mean, it had a happy end, but people died. And
Yeah.
that was remarkable coming out of that studio, just remarkable.
Right. Star Wars was always a big part of my life growing up, and that's why I got into science fiction. Xena was actually also a big part of my life too. I was I was very into Greek mythology and stuff like that. But I could tell you right now, I've only seen the finale once. I'll never see it again. I was bawling.
I feel that way about Person of Interest, which is, I think, one of the most brilliant TV series ever done, and is a science fiction show. If people haven't watched it, it's available on Prime Video. I mean, it's remarkable. It's my friend Jonah Nolan's show, and I'm trying. I think I own the discs. I've watched it. I don't know how many times because it's epic storytelling. As a writer, for me to study how he did it, and I haven't been able to bring myself to watch season 5. It's only 13 episodes because they knew they were getting canceled. And so Jonah was able to craft the perfect ending. And, if you don't stick the landing, I don't care how great the journey was. If the ending sucks, you're going to disappoint your reader, your viewer, everybody. And this was just perfection. We watched that final episode. My friend Lynn Wein, who created Wolverine and Swamp Thing and Fury, we would get together every Thursday night and we'd make dinner, and then we would watch The Flash, and then we would watch Person of Interest. And when we got to that final episode of season 5, Lynn and I were on the couch hugging each other and sobbing. And the dogs were looking at us like, okay,
what's going on?
What's wrong with you people? But yeah,
did we comfort them? Did we not? I mean, I remember I was alone on my couch just crying. I was like 16. Yeah.
But anyway, I urge people, if you love and you won't realize it's science fiction for the first 7 or 8 episodes. There's hints, but hang in there because it's amazing. It's all about AI. So go find this.
I'm gonna have to tell my husband.
Yeah, go watch this show. It just gets, and when I met Jonah for the first time, I said to him, how on earth did you get this show past CBS, which is like, old people's television, like how did you get this? And how did you get a science fiction show past Les Moonves? And he said to me, I didn't tell him. I told him it was a procedural. And then after about episode 8, he got called into Moonves's office and got reamed out. This is a goddamn science fiction show. I hate science fiction. What are you doing? But the show was critically acclaimed, so there was nothing he could do. But he kept trying to get the show canceled because he hated it because it was science fiction.
So look, that's what people wanted, and that's the whole point. You give what the audience wants.
Yeah, no, I mean, we won. I mean, the geeks inherited the earth. I play video games too. And video games, television, movies, science fiction, fantasy, we won.
Yeah.
We control the medium. And we're just dragging everybody else along with us who didn't catch on early enough, So.
It's like, we've been telling you this whole time, this is cool stuff, and you didn't listen. You thought we were just,
I mean,
geeks with glasses.
Yeah, go watch your Blue Bloods or Hawaii Five-O, but we're doing the cool stuff, you know.
We're doing the cool stuff. Yeah.
Any for your thoughts?
All right. So this first question, actually both questions come from Tim from FSF Popcast. And he says, thanks for all your great work on TNG. Here's a question he loves to ask writers. How do you structure your stories first? Do you flesh out the characters and their motivation first, or the story premise and world first? What's your process?
Okay. The first thing that happens for me is I see a character in an interesting situation. And then I go, who is that person and how did they get there? And then I start to explore that character and the situation. And then I step back, and the next thing I ask is, how does the story end? I've got a plot now, but how does it end? Because if I don't know the ending, I never start. Because in Hollywood, we're taught to plot backwards. We start with the end, at the end of Act 4 or 5 or whatever it is, and we plot backwards. And I plot my books now the same way I plot scripts that I was taught in Hollywood. So then I figure out what the end is. And then I figure out what the teaser is, what the little thing is. And then I start to figure out what's the end of Act 1, what's the end of Act 2, what's the end of Act 3, and I plot backwards. Because if you know where you're going, it's really easy to know scenes that you need to get there. But before I ever start writing, the next thing I ask myself is, what is the theme of this story? I mean, the theme of the book I'm writing right now, I'm writing my first fantasy, and it's terrifying because you have to create everything, is redemption possible? That's my theme. And that's the sort of foundation that's supporting the plot. And the thing I say when I'm teaching, I say to students, plot is the stuff that happens, and theme is why it matters. Another way is, I think it was Hemingway or Dashiell Hammett, I can't remember which one, said, great fiction is about the human heart in conflict with itself. So, you know, what matters here? What are you saying that's important about the human condition? So that's where I start. And when I have my main character, then I sort of flesh out the supporting cast that will be around them. And then I start plotting backwards. And then once I have an outline sitting on a board, you know, with Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, my novels usually break out into 3-act, teaser and 3 acts. Screenplays, unfortunately, everybody seems to want 5 acts now. So I do a teaser in 5, but that's harder. At least now with streaming, you don't have to have these act breaks for a commercial. You know, you can kind of keep flowing it, but you need to kind of have that pacing in your head. You know, where's the next big moment? You know, where's the reveal at the end of Act 2? Where's the, you know, all those sort of questions.
Oh, awesome. I like that idea about starting from the end and knowing how it ends and working your way backwards, because then you have that way of, like, you know, kind of like the little red, the red yarn on the board, you know, like, how does it connect, you know? Yeah.
We literally do that. And the other thing that I learned when Trek was my first television experience, I assign a different colored pen to every character, because then I can tell if I'm losing track of a character, which can either tell me I need to come up with something more for that character to do, or maybe I don't need that character at all, and I should drop them out of the story. I mean, that happened to us with Troy on one episode. Troy was always blue pen, and we looked up, and at the end of Act 2, she was just gone. Oh dear, you know, we need to find something for Troy to do now. And so we had to go back and do some replotting. It's a really great visual cue. I mean, the other thing you can use are colored cards. I've gone to colored cards now, just because that's, you know, multicolored cards that, okay, the bad guy's red and the good guy is this. And then I write. And the nice thing about it is you can write in bits of dialogue that come into your head that occur to you in a particular scene. You could jot it down, and then you don't forget it. So that's
nice. Cool. I've dabbled in a little bit of fan fiction, but I've kind of done that where if I think of, I already have the plot, but if I think of like a line or something, I'm like pulling out my phone, I'm writing in my notes, like I can't forget this.
No, won't forget that. And listen, I'm a huge proponent of fan fiction. I've written fan fiction. I wrote a Mass Effect fan fiction because I was so pissed at how that third game ended. I had to write my own ending because I hated it. And
Nice.
no, I think fan fiction is great. There are wonderful writers working fan fiction, and it's a place to write your million words and practice, So don't let anybody diss fan writing, and everybody, if that's a place to start learning your craft, go for it,
Yeah, that's kind of what I did since I was little, from Xena fan fiction on up. Now I'm doing TNG fan fiction, but now I have this, and also I like to do video editing where I'm like taking a show or movie or whatever and clipping it to a song and kind of creating its own story or kind of highlighting a moment or things like that. That's what I like to do. The second question that Tim had was, is there a story that you wanted to pursue on TNG, but it just wasn't in the cards? If so, what would that be?
I wanted to write a data triptych. And the triptych was going to be, the first one was Measure of a Man. Is he human or is he a toaster? Or is he, a person or is he a toaster? Then I wrote Instance of Command, which was about how do you actually lead? I mean, there's something ephemeral about leadership. It's, and logic might not be the thing you need. Sometimes it's passion. Sometimes it's, and by the way, that is the only script in my career that has ever been rewritten. A lot of what I did was there, but there was a huge blow up, and Michael Wagner quit because they were blowing up my script. He's the forgotten man of Star Trek. And it got rewritten, and, it's okay. But if you want to read my version of Instance of Command, it's on my website under writing. So you can go read the script that I wrote, because Gene gave me the task of getting Data laid again. I had to get Data laid. And I will never forget, he read my outline. Gene read over my outline, and then he called me in to give me notes on the outline, and he said, Data is fully functional in every way. So can they make the beast with two backs? And I was like, oh my God, how do I get an alien? How do I get a logical robot to sleep with this woman? But I came up with a way, and you will see that in this. It's all very logical. Anyway, my script is there. You can read it. And so to get back to the question, what was the third? I wanted to write a third Data episode, which was that Data has to violate the 3 laws of robotics. He has to figure out how to commit a premeditated murder. There's a good reason for it. The person absolutely deserves it. And he has to figure out a way. And I never got to write that episode. And I always wanted to, is how do you take a robot and help them get past their programming not to harm humans? And, one thing if you're being attacked and they're protecting the ship and that sort of, but how could he go, okay, this person needs to die? And I really, really wanted to write that episode, and I never got to. So.
That sounds like it's just knowing your stories. That would have been a very interesting thing to see.
I think Brett had fun with it too.
Oh, I'm sure. Brett loves to just, do something a little different with Data, because sometimes it could just be very one-dimensional and just do the same thing. And so when he got to do something different, like in Data's day, Gates got to do choreograph a tap scene with him. Like, it's just go for it, and that's what they did. So, but what I love is, like, when I had mentioned about the high ground, and, Gabrielle Beaumont was the first woman director. Gates was the second one to ever direct for TNG, and unfortunately we didn't have a lot, which we had more, but at least it was a start, because we did have a lot of women directors in DS9 and Voyager, and they did have those stories that I think you would be very interested in.
If I didn't have PTSD, but yeah.
I get it. I get it. Just know that I think they took a little piece of your the way that you did things, and they, certain writers and people ran with it. So just know that is continuing.
No. Okay.
Yeah. But thank you, Melinda, for sitting down with me and having this conversation. I had so much fun. Just let the listeners know if you have anything to plug in or where they can find you.
I'm easy to find. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on Threads. I'm on Instagram, Facebook. I have a website, melindasnodgrass.com, and that's where you can, see the book covers of all the books I have that are available on Amazon, iBooks, Kobo, Ingram. You can order my science fiction books there, and I'm you can email me through my website. I'm happy to answer questions. I won't read your scripts. I can't do that because I can't get accused of stealing ideas or anything. But always happy to offer advice. And I have written up, like, there's one of my blog posts is how I plot, which goes into a lot of detail about how I lay that out. So if you go find my website and go under my blog, you'll find some things that might be interesting. And if you like horses, I write a lot about my horses because I ride them, and I have 2 horses. So that's my plug. So, and thank you so much, Jessie. I really had fun. I love talking with other fans, because I'm a fan at heart. That's what I am.
And I also love, we also love our cats. Like, that's a very big. Give Loki and love.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, although I said to Loki, he keeps not, he's a pain in the ass. I keep saying, do you not like your name? Do you want a different name? I mean, I cannot figure. Yandu is like totally in. But I did finally figure out the name of my car. I always name my cars, and I have a relatively new car. I have a Lucid, an all-electric Lucid, and I finally have its name. I mean, one of my other cars was Loki, and then I had Skywalker. This one is Revan. So any of you who've played Star Wars game, Knights of the Old Republic, you will know where Revan comes from. So.
Nice. I don't know if you've seen my post, but I got in an accident a couple of weeks ago, and I lost my Millennium Falcon, unfortunately. And I was so upset because it was a stick shift, and they don't make stick anymore. And I got a new car, and it ended up being an Eclipse Cross. We're a Mitsubishi fan. And I was like, oh, I got to think of a name. And of course, I was thinking Elios for Beverly, and I was thinking all these stuff, other things. And my husband's like, well, why don't you name it Luna? And it's because it was white. And Beverly Crusher was born on the moon in Luna. So I was like, oh, that's cool. And my new kitten, because my cat passed away last year, I named her Beverly, but her foster name was Luna. So I was like, oh, well, this works. Yeah. But then my sister-in-law, she took it a step further. I'm not going to do this, but it was hilarious. She's like, well, is it middle initial R? And I was like, R. She's like, yeah, Luna R Eclipse, lunar eclipse. I
love it.
I was like, not a bad idea, but I don't know if I'll go that far.
You might not go that far, but Luna is a good name for a car, definitely.
Yes, I'm very happy with Luna. It won't replace my Millennium Falcon, but definitely, we've welcomed her into the family.
Yeah,
so
I miss Loki, but these things happen. So.
Things happen. Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, it was my fault. So the Falcon is gone because of me, so I can only have myself to blame.
Well, I'm hurt, so that's the main.
Yes,
thing.
I'm okay. But just to remind you guys, in 2 weeks, I will be discussing the life and death of Jack Crusher. Please don't forget to hit me up there. And yeah, thank you again, Melinda. I'm again honored to meet you and talk to you. It has been so great. But thank you guys. And as always, if I could do this, live long and prosper. Have a good night.
Crusher out.